If Al Capone was the rock star of the mafia, the face splashed across every newspaper, there was another mobster who was the silent genius working behind the scenes. This was Lucky Luciano, the maestro who composed the symphony of modern, organized crime. Forget the image of the thick-voiced, hot-tempered gangster who solves everything with bullets. The story of Charles Lucky Luciano is that of a visionary, a revolutionary who looked at the bloody chaos of street gangs and saw the potential for a nationwide corporation. This is not just the story of a Sicilian criminal who made it big. It is the story of how a young immigrant with a mind sharper than any blade demolished the old mafia and built in its place an interconnected empire, a network of power stretching from coast to coast in the United States. He turned extortion into a business, gang warfare into corporate strategy, and rival bosses into members of a board of directors. And ultimately, it is the story of how the United States government, after convicting its most ingenious enemy, found itself forced to strike a deal with him to win a world war. Prepare to learn the story of Salvatore Lucania, the man who became Lucky Luciano and invented organized crime as we know it today. Born as Salvatore Lucania in 1897 in the heart of Sicily, his American story began like so many others, with a voyage by ship to a land of promise. But early 20th century New York, especially the Lower East Side, was a cauldron of poverty, but also of opportunity, where the line between honest work and crime was almost invisible. For young Salvatore, the rules of the new land seemed designed to keep people like him at the bottom. School taught him nothing the streets were not already teaching far more effectively. It was in this environment that he forged the most important alliance of his life, not with other Italians, but with two Jewish youths as ambitious and marginalized as he was, Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel. Together, they formed a multi-ethnic gang, an anomaly at a time when criminals stuck to their own heritage. It was the first sign of Luciano's pragmatic thinking. Loyalty and profit mattered more than blood. His nickname Lucky came from an event that should have ended his career before it began. In 1929, he was kidnapped by a rival gang, beaten, stabbed, and left for dead on a beach. Against all odds, he survived. When the police found him, he refused to identify his attackers, adhering to the mafia's code of silence, the omerta. The incident left him with a permanent facial scar near his eye, and the nickname that would define him. He was not just tough, he was lucky. And in the criminal world, luck is a valuable currency. While Al Capone was building his personal fiefdom in Chicago, Luciano faced a bigger problem in New York. Power was divided between two old guard bosses known as Mustache Petes. On one side was Joe the Boss Masseria, on the other, Salvatore Maranzano. They were mafia dinosaurs, men clinging to outdated Sicilian traditions, suspicious of non-Sicilians, waging an endless bloody war for control of the city, the Castellammarese War. Luciano, officially a soldier for Masseria, saw the war as a waste, bad for business, bad for stability. While the old bosses fought for honor and tradition, Luciano, Lansky, and their new generation of gangsters wanted one thing: steady, uninterrupted profit. That is when he executed the boldest masterstroke in mafia history. First, he struck a secret deal with Maranzano to betray his own boss. In 1931, Luciano invited Masseria to lunch at a restaurant in Coney Island. During a card game, Luciano excused himself to use the restroom. Seconds later, gunmen stormed in and riddled Joe Masseria with bullets. The war was over, or so it seemed. But the old Maranzano declared himself capo di tutti I capi, boss of all bosses, and reorganized the mafia, rewarding Luciano with a position of power. However, Luciano had not toppled one king just to crown another. Maranzano was just another Mustache Pete, a tyrant with limited vision. 6 months later, Luciano struck again. He sent a squad of Jewish assassins disguised as federal agents to Maranzano's office. The last of the dinosaurs was stabbed and shot to death. In a single year, Luciano had eliminated New York's two most powerful bosses and ended the era of the Mustache Petes. Now the path was clear for his true innovation. With power consolidated, Luciano did something revolutionary. He abolished the title of boss of all bosses. He knew absolute power corrupts, and, more importantly, bred endless wars and put a target on the leader's back. In its place, he created the Commission. Think of the Commission as the Mafia's board of directors. It was composed of the bosses of the most powerful New York families and other major cities, like Chicago. Its purpose was simple yet brilliant: to regulate organized crime across the country. The Commission settled territorial disputes, authorized or forbade executions, and created policies to maximize everyone's profits. It transformed the Mafia from a collection of feuding feudal lords into a national crime syndicate, with Luciano as chairman, not dictator. His power came from intelligence, diplomacy, and his unshakable alliance with Meyer Lansky. While Capone was a king ruling by brute force and public visibility, Luciano was a chief executive officer operating from the shadows, preferring influence to notoriety. He owned brothels, controlled unions, and had a fortune, but his name rarely appeared in the papers. That was his strength. But invisibility does not last forever. An ambitious, relentless district attorney named Thomas E. Dewey saw Luciano as the perfect target to boost his political career. Dewey could not convict Luciano for murder or bootlegging. Witnesses were too afraid. So he used a different tactic, targeting Luciano through his prostitution network. In 1936, Dewey built a case accusing Luciano of masterminding a vast forced prostitution ring. The case was flimsy, relying largely on the testimony of prostitutes and low-level criminals pressured into testifying in exchange for lighter sentences. To many, the charge seemed absurd. Would a man dealing in millions really involve himself directly in running brothels? Still, Dewey was relentless. He painted Luciano as the country's biggest trafficker of women. In the end, the jury convicted him. Charles Lucky Luciano was sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison, the longest sentence ever handed down for such a crime. The architect of modern crime was brought down, not by his grand strategic crimes, but by a charge considered dirty even by underworld standards. Luciano's story could have ended there, in a prison cell upstate. But then the world went to war. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States Navy was desperate. There were suspicions of sabotage in New York's docks, controlled by unions under Italian Mafia influence. In one of the strangest episodes in American history, the government made a pact with the devil. They needed help securing the ports, and they knew the only man whose orders dockworkers and union leaders would obey was behind bars, Lucky Luciano. Through intermediaries, the Navy struck a deal. In exchange for his cooperation, Luciano's sentence would be reconsidered. From his cell, Luciano gave the order. Sabotage at the docks ceased. Later, as the Allies planned the invasion of Sicily, naval intelligence again turned to Luciano. He used his contacts in the Sicilian Mafia to provide maps, information, and ensure the local population aided American troops. The exact extent of Luciano's contribution to the war effort is still debated, but the result is not. In 1946, prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey, now governor of New York, commuted Luciano's sentence. He kept his word. But there was a condition. Luciano would be deported to Italy and never set foot on American soil again. Luciano was freed but became a king in exile. He tried to set up in Cuba, organizing the famous 1946 Havana Conference, a major mafia summit, to reaffirm his power. But United States government pressure forced Cuba to expel him. He was sent back to Italy, where he spent the rest of his life in Naples under constant surveillance. He was extremely wealthy, a living legend, but far from the center of the power he had built. Strong evidence suggests he became a central figure in the international heroin trade, using old connections to build a new drug pipeline to the United States, the only way to remain relevant. On January 26, 1962, Lucky Luciano went to Naples Airport to meet an American film producer, interested in making a movie about his life. While waiting, he suffered a massive heart attack and died right there on the airport floor, an anticlimactic end for the man who had reorganized the underworld. While Al Capone's legacy is that of the iconic gangster, a pop culture figure, Lucky Luciano's legacy runs deeper and is far more significant. He left behind not just a legend, but a structure, a system. The commission he created ruled American organized crime for more than half a century. He proved that cooperation and strategy were more profitable than war and chaos. Luciano was a monster, a criminal whose innovation allowed crime to flourish more efficiently than ever. But his story is the embodiment of strategic intelligence applied to the underworld. He was not just a gangster, he was the architect who drew the blueprint for the modern mafia, an invisible empire whose foundations he built with blood, betrayal, and a perversely brilliant business vision.